Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel. I'm the technical director here with RW Supply and Design, and today we're talking about alternative stains, specifically Hypertone stain from basic coatings. So I get the privilege of talking with Tim Young. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Thank you, Daniel. My name is Tim Young. I'm with Basic Coatings, Regional District Sales Manager for the company. I basically cover from Idaho to New Mexico to Iowa, and pretty much everything in between. I'm also one of the two regional sports technicians for the company, so I do have a background in that as well. But yeah, Hypertone stains have been a great product for us. We're doing some really neat stuff with it out there.
This video is part of our larger series on alternative stains, but this is a unique video in that all my other products that I've tested, I got to interview the reps and kind of get the lay of the land of the product, how to apply it and all of that, and then go work with it. Just due to some scheduling stuff, we actually got here's a little bit cart before the horse and got it a little backwards. So I actually got to work with your product, and now I get to ask you questions about it and figure out where I messed up and what I could do better with it. So, I mean, just to give you a background, I've worked with Hypertone a lot. Typically, though, I'm just using it for repairs on pre-finished floors or sand-finished floors that have already been stained and finished. And I've found it's a absolutely excellent product for that. I mean, I've used it on a ton of different repair work, but this was the first time I ever used it like on a just full sand and finished floor, applying it like I would another stain. So it's kind of a little bit of a new experience for me on an old product. So I'll tell you a little bit about that kind of as we go through the interview. But I guess, just to start out, what I've asked everybody else who has an alternative stain is just the basic question that, oil-based stains have been around a long time, or oil solvent stains, I guess I should say, have been around a long time. It's what the majority of contractors use, and a lot of contractors probably would not change any method unless they had to. So for a product that is a good working product, why would a contractor move away from that onto an alternative product like Hypertone? What are going to be the advantages for them?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, contractors don't like change, right? So, we're not trying to change them, so to speak. We're trying to give them a different alternative. Like here in Colorado, they're limited to buying quarts of stain because of the VOC regulations in the state. We have the ability to sell them gallons and pints of our Hypertone. So there's that. But the main thing is that we're trying to give guys another tool in their toolbox to help them with some of the crazy colors that are out there. We can do some pretty magical things. The other thing that's really nice about Hypertone is with some species of wood like Douglas fir, pine, maple, where you have that really harsh reaction to oil-based stains, where you get the blotchiness, the unevenness of the stains on those species of woods. The Hypertone tends to give you, you'll still see a little bit of the blotchiness, but it's going to be a much easier to apply product on those types of species of wood. So there's that. The other thing is, with our stain, if you can give it 4 to 6 hours, depending on the temperature, it's going to dry, and it's going to dry, consistently every time. Whereas with some, oil-based stains out there, a heavily pigmented type of color is going to take much longer to dry than, say, a neutral or a hickory, something with a lighter pigmented. So you're not going to see that inconsistency that you would in an oil base in our Hypertone. The other thing is, we're not asking the contractors to completely do away with their OMU finishes, their oil, for the top coats and sealers. You can still use our Hypertone with an oil modified sealer and finish, as well as a water-based finish. So we're really not upsetting the apple cart. We're just giving guys another tool for their toolbox to go out and be successful.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, one of the other big advantages too that I would point out is every time I use an oil solvent stain, I smell oil in my nose for like a day afterwards. And thankfully, I don't do floors full time, but if I did, I imagine I would probably spend half the year with oil solvent in my nose. So having a product
Absolutely.
like Hypertone is a lot more pleasant to work with, on a day-to-day basis where you're getting stain maybe splashed on your arm or smelling it all day long or that kind of a thing.
And it
So
rinse it if you get it on your skin, it rinses off immediately. It cleans up so much better. There's almost no odor with it. And so in that regard, the homeowner is going to be a lot happier because they're not smelling it. But yeah, that's a tremendous advantage. The other thing is, it not only does it clean up really well on your skin, but if you get a drip on the wall or a splatter mark or something like that, you can just take a damp cloth and remove it, and it wipes right off. So that's another huge advantage with the Hypertone.
gotcha. Awesome. So walk me through a little bit about how you would recommend applying the Hypertone. When I put it on the panel, I mean, I watch your instructional videos, which you have good videos online showing guys how to apply it, and I tried to put that to the best use. But if you were to sit down with a contractor and you were to just walk them through what to do, what would you tell them?
Okay. So typically what I do, Daniel, is I talk to the contractor, and I actually ask them questions. Okay, what is your current process for applying stain? You still have guys that are diehard that love the look of a hand wiped stain on a wood floor. There's still a ton of those guys out there that the only way they'll apply stain is by hand applying it. Then you have the guys that are really that love to buff. If you're doing a larger job, say over 800 square feet, 600 square feet, a lot of guys want to have the ability to buff the stain into the floor. So that's kind of where I start. So if they're going to go with the hand application, I'm going to basically just go through the process, which is you're going to start about an inch off the wall. And I like to roll it on. And when I talk to guys, I say, hey, look, I know this stain isn't the least expensive product on the market, but you're going to get about 850 square feet out of a gallon of our stain if you roll it on. So I'm going to have them roll it on. So I'm going to have them follow the grain of the wood. I'm going to have them roll it on, and then we're just going to get some terry cloth towels, and we're going to wipe it off. And then we're going to come off about an inch off the wall, and we're just going to hand wipe that up to the edge. And then once we get that done, then we're going to go to the next coat. But when we apply the next coat, we're not going to apply what the next roller over our existing roller mark. We're going to take it about an inch to 2 inches off of where our first roll was. And what that does is it gives us a gap. And because if you create that gap, you can always tie in between where you applied it and wipe that in and get the look that you're looking for. And
So
then
okay, so real quick question. So when you're rolling on, you're rolling down a pretty good amount of stain, like you're kind of
correct,
covering the grain of the wood with the stain, right? And
correct.
then that allows you, you're saying like with your edges, that allows you when you come back to rag off,
Hmm.
to as you're ragging off, blend all the way to the wall. Um,
Correct,
okay.
correct,
And then that's the same thing you're doing once you're rolling your next stripe down the room, which I'm assuming, maybe you said this, I'm assuming is with the run of the boards.
correct.
You're leaving that gap of unfinished wood between what you just stained and what you are staining. And again, as you're ragging off with the rag, there's enough stain for you to blend back into what you previously stained.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes.
Interesting. I'm learning about what I did wrong. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So, and when you follow those rules, you don't get any lap lining, which was always kind of the buzzword about water-based stains is they lap line.
Uh-huh.
They don't look good. You get these rows of stain on the floor, and you've got darker spots and lighter spots, and so that this eliminates that. And yes, you're actually rolling it on like paint. So as soon as you start to hear the roller on the floor and you start to get that stipply sound, you got to put more on there and keep going. So I tend to tell guys you want to put it on like it's free. and you just want to put heavy coats on there. And then, like I said, you're going to grab your rag.
What nap of a roller do you use to do that?
3/8. Yep,
Just
absolutely.
same as like a finish roller?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. The thing is if you go to a thicker roller cover, you're kind of wasting money because you're filling up the roller cover with it instead of putting it on the floor. So I like to go with a little bit finer, but you still want to put it on, and you want to put it on heavy. And then you just never overlap with your wet application of the stain. And if you do that, you'll pretty much have success every time. Now, for the guys that are doing the buffing application, our system is very different. So a couple things also. When you're mixing our stains, you always want to add a product that we make called Stain Glide. And what that is it's a retarder, or it's a solvent that you can put into there that slows it down and gives you more working time. So when you're doing that, especially in dry climates, you always want to add 25% by volume for both hands application and more importantly, the buffing system, because you have to have that in there when you're buffing.
Okay,
25% by volume.
25% of the final volume, like
Yes.
if I'm going to end up with a gallon total, including the Stain Glide, I want 25% of a gallon or a quart of Stain Glide? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So when you're doing the buffing application, it's a different process. So first thing is you're going to roll it on, and then you're going to go, like I said, about 1.5 to 2 inches off the wall. So when you're starting, and then instead of using a carpet to buff the stain into the wood, you're going to use a thick white SPP pad to remove the excess off the floor and onto the pad. And then you're going to go, you don't want to go farther than say 2 feet of raw stain. Okay, so you're going to roll the 2 feet, and then you're going to use the thick white pad to remove the excess off. You're going to get about 75 square feet to maybe 100 square feet before you flip the pad, because it's going to fill up pretty quick with the stain. And then you're just going to work your way across the room, rolling it on 2 feet sections. So this wide, 2 feet. You're going to remove that excess. You're going to roll your next group of 2 feet. You're going to remove the excess. And it's a very easy process to apply it with the buffing mechanism. The difference is guys are just used to the carpet pad where they're buffing it into the floor instead of using the pad to remove the excess.
Okay. And when you say thick white pad, I assume you just mean like a thick white polishing pad.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What would you do with the edges when you're buffing?
So with the edges, I'm still going to probably hand wipe those just on the edges up against the walls. That's I typically see that's the best way to do it. But once, you're
same
like
same inch of raw wood and then wipe off the edges at the same time.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But with a buffer, you're still going to get really close to the wall. So your amount of time on the floor wiping is not going to be that much. You're going to be, it's not, you're not spending a lot of time down there. You're just going to get it even, get it on and even, and then you're going to start the buffing process to get it off. So.
And if you're new at the buffer, you may even get into the wall.
That could happen too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you put me on a 220 volt buffer and I might just do that. So.
Okay, well that makes sense. That's like some other products I've done, and even like hard wax oils, where the last step is to buff off with a white pad. So because it buffs and evens at the same time. So then I would assume, because I mean nobody's going to be perfect with a buffer, you're probably going to get into that raw wood a little bit and have like little streaky swirls. But when you paint that new coat on and buff that new coat out, it's going to even.
It's going to even it out, correct. And then the application of the wet stain back on the floor as you're moving across the room is the same. You always want to leave a couple of inches in between where you've rolled on. You never want to overlap, even with this, even with the buffing process. You always want to leave a gap there and just keep working your way across the room. And we do have some great videos on our website that shows the application via the buffing. So
great. So if you're working your way out of a room or down a hallway with a buffer, can you just use that same process, but perpendicular to the boards as you work your way back out of a hallway? Or would you
Absolutely.
tape half the hallway, or?
No, I would just keep going. I would keep going, and just as long as you're not overlapping the stain, you're going to be fine.
Okay, so it's like leave your buffer in the old stain, roll your new spot, and then buff on to that and even that out.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Great.
And then last but not least, we do have a third leg to our product line, which is we have the ability to take our colors and our stains and add them into our water-based finish. Now, where this process really comes into play is contractor Mr. Smith has done Mrs. Jones' floor. She signed off on the color. She loves the color of the wood. It's the perfect depth in this, it's not too light, it's not too dark. And then all of a sudden she calls a month later and says, Contractor Smith, I don't like the look of the floor. It's not dark enough. What are my options? So in this particular case, what we have the ability to do is the contractor can grab his trio or, his buffer, go back into the house, 220 on a screen or 220, sand it with 220, knock it down, and they can go ahead and mix up, let's say it's tobacco. They can add the tobacco into our finish and apply one or two more coats of tinted finish on top of that floor with either a T-bar or a lamb's wool or a pad, paint pad, or a 10-inch pad, and they can darken that floor up without him having to grab their, machines and taking it down to raw wood and reapplying stain. So that only works in an environment where you are wanting to go to a darker shade of that same color. So it's really nice for the contractors because they're not having to grabbing their belt machines and going back in there and stripping it down to raw wood and reapplying a different color.
Yeah, gotcha. That is great. So, I mean, you can tint coat with it. And like you mentioned, tint coating kind of works when you're going to a darker color. If you're trying to go lighter, I'm guessing it turns out kind of cloudy looking and doesn't look quite right.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to do. I mean, if you're trying to go from like a light gray or or a medium gray to a light gray, it's really hard to do. It just doesn't. What ends up happening is as you add layers onto the floor, it just keeps darkening it. So, and then we also use the tinting process on the gym side of the business where we're doing, school colors, yellows, blues, reds, and rather than using stain, because unfortunately on a gym floor, there's a lot of there's logos, there's stencils, there's graphics, there's all these different types of applications. And so when you're trying to apply stain onto, say, a letter or a logo, you get a lot of bleed underneath there. So what we have the ability to, with the tinting process, is to eliminate all that bleed. And so we've got this system has been really, really going good for us on the sports side of the business.
Great. In terms of sanding floor, anything different a contractor would do for sanding a floor? And what's the final grit you'd want them to end up at?
The final, I like to be at 100, but there's some guys, if they want to, they can go to 120, but I prefer 100. It just depends on how intense you want the color on the floor. If you want it super intense, it's going to be harder to do with 120 than it would be with 100. So especially in darker colors and like some of your pastel type colors, some of the grays and stuff like that, if you really want an intense look, I like to be at 100.
Okay. Do you need to water pop?
So our recommendation is that you do water pop, although on red oak I typically won't. I just feel like it's red oak, I'm gonna it's not going to really change that much of the look of the stain. Our stain is very heavily pigmented with automotive water-based pigments, and so it's going to give you really good color. Now on pine, Douglas fir, maple, absolutely, I'm gonna water pop. if I'm using it as a traditional stain every time. Yep.
Okay. Um, I mean, I applied it by myself, and I used a 10-inch pad to paint on. I didn't use a roller. Roller would have been easier. I think a pad achieved kind of the same result there.
Mhm.
I didn't have your trick of leaving an unfinished gap. That would have been nice to know. But I padded my way out of a room, and for the most part, I was very pleasantly surprised and happy. I had, a good lap line where I was trying to back my way out of a room perpendicular to the boards, and I had to repair that. But is this the kind of thing? And I did that in a panel that was 16 foot by 12 foot. So it's basically like a bedroom with a little simulated closet.
Sure.
But is this the type of product that if somebody were to go in and to stain like a house, you would recommend a minimum of two people, or is this something that one guy could do by themselves? Or
So on, 500 square feet or less, one person's going to be able to apply it very, very easily. But if you're doing an entire house, 2,000 square feet or whatever, it's always best to have two guys because you can have one person applying it, one person wiping, or one person applying and one person buffing. I just think that, the more the better, as far as that goes. Um, so yeah, I mean, I definitely would recommend it. Now there are, contractors that are doing large jobs like that are by themselves, and they can definitely do it. It's just, they're going to have to start and stop and get done, right? Get on the job and get off. So that's the one thing I will, caution guys is don't try and stop or take a call or just get in there and get moving.
okay. How long does it take to dry?
So our recommendation is, in our technical data sheet, it's about 12 hours overnight. But I will tell you, most of the time I will wait 4 to 6 hours, and
Okay.
it doesn't matter which color that I'm applying. That's about the mouse. That's as a traditional stain. If you're tinting finish, you're going to be able to follow the same rules and guidelines that you would for hot coating. So you could go 2 hours and go to the next coat. But 4 to 6 hours is typically good, especially out in the dry arid parts of the country. Um, so yeah, that's what I definitely recommend is 4 to 6 hours.
Okay.
If I gray load.
And stain glide increases that time, right?
It does not. It does
Oh,
not
okay.
increase the time. All it does is it just leaves the stain open, especially in buffing application, to where you're not starting to get that grab with the buffer. When an oil-based stain is drying to, it's at the stage where it's pretty dry and you're trying to go back on there with a buffer, it can start to grab and it starts to
Mhm.
shake and it does that
Right.
thing. That's what the stain glide eliminates, is it keeps the top layer of the stain open. So when you're running over that area with the buffer, you're not going to get any of that. Um, it's where it's like it wants to grab the pad of the buffer and stop it from moving. So
Okay.
that's what it does. The other thing I do want to double back to on Daniel is on the water popping. The one beauty of having a water oil hybrid stain like Hypertone, as long as there's no puddles on the floor, they can immediately start applying the stain. They're not having to wait, for hours like you do with the traditional oil-based stain for the water to evaporate off the floor. As
Okay.
long as there's no puddling and you see the floor is pretty even after you water pop, you're ready to go. You can start applying. You're not gonna hurt the stain isn't gonna have a violent reaction to the water on the floor.
Okay. Um, is there a reason why, or could you put down two coats of stain?
No, you could not. So what'll happen is so our stain it's not, like I said, it's not a two component stain. So you never want a double stain. Now, you can do repairs,
Mhm.
where you need to, but you never wanted to put two coats of stain. That's a big no-no with it. It's just yeah, that's no good because
Okay.
it'll never dry basically.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Well, good to know that beforehand, before
yeah,
attempting.
yes.
So you mentioned repairs. I had to do some repairing and I had to make up my own repair system because I didn't have the luxury of talking with you beforehand. So I tried a couple of things like on my lap line, and I left some heavy streaks, and I also tried to reapply some stain over some of those spots and discovered what you're talking about with not double coating. Um, what I tried initially, what I thought might work would be like a water dampened cloth.
Mhm.
I found out that on my heavy streaks, it actually stripped a lot of stain off where it was like, it looked like 50% stained as the wood around it. So then I moved to just a dry maroon pad, just kind of like padding out the heavy spots, not applying a ton of pressure and kind of evening out in both directions. And I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised with how easy that was to even out the heavy areas with just a dry maroon pad. So
Absolutely.
what did I get right? What did I get wrong? And how would you recommend repairing any sort of heavy or lap line or any blemishes in your stain?
Okay, so let's say hypothetically you get a lap line. There's a very easy fix to that, which is what you did, which is take a maroon pad and you're going to wipe it and you're going to just basically knock that area down gently with the maroon pad, and you will get it as even, almost as even if you had applied it correctly the first time. So that's the easiest way to repair that. The other thing I also want to forgot to mention is that if a contractor is on the floor and they're doing a hand wide application and they do happen to get a sweat drip on the stain,
Mhm.
that's not going to negatively impact or affect the stain like it would an oil stain. So you're not going to have to worry about it damaging that part where you dripped water or sweat onto an area. So that makes it nice. But going back to, let's say you do have a board that has something wrong with it that they didn't notice in the sanding process, so they've got to go in there and repair it. You're going to take that area, you're going to sand it down, and basically you're going to follow the same sanding sequence. So you're going to go to like a 100 if that's what you finaled with. You're going to go in there and just knock that area down with some 100. You're going to water pop if you've water popped, and then you're going to reapply more stain into that area. And that's as easy as it is to do a repair on the stain. You just follow your sanding sequence, you follow your water popping. If you did water pop, you apply more stain, you let it dry, and then you start applying your sealer and your finish. So in that regard, it's very easy to repair. So it's one of the easiest stains to repair, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be a nightmare just based on work with other water-based stains in the past. I mean, not designed for flooring, but just the way they overlap and you can never even it out. It was surprisingly easy to even out with just a marine pad. So, and looked really good afterwards.
Excellent. And then just one more thing about what you did with the wet towel when you tried to wipe it off was basically what you did was, because that towel was wet, you wiped off all of the water-based pigment in the stain, and you were left with the oil that was penetrated the floor. So that's kind of what you did. So you never want to use a wet rag other than if you got a drip on a wall or a baseboard or something, or to wipe your hands. But you never want to use wet on the stain, a wet rag.
There any differences in how you would coat it with finish?
No, you let it dry the 4 to 6 hours. You apply the sealer, which are with ours is either which would on white oak it would be raw, or for red oak non-tannin species you would just use our hydroline sealer. Let that dry, apply a coat of finish. For most contractors will put a coat of finish down. They'll screen that for grain raise, and then they'll go with the final second coat of finish, and you're done.
Okay, awesome. Oil and water-based finish go over it fine.
All day long. As long as you give it the right amount of dry time, it's works great.
And then the question I always ask when I'm testing any product, guys are going to find creative ways to screw stuff up. I already said on this interview that I found a creative way to screw up my repair process and apparently lap lines. So, what would you say is the most likely way a contractor is going to mess up Hypertone, and how can they avoid that pitfall?
So the most likely is the wet application of the stain, whether they're hand wiping or they're buffing. And then the other way that they're gonna
And by wet application, you mean putting wet stain over into the stain that you just put down?
correct. You
Okay.
never want to overlap the stain. And then the other thing is that guys or gals that typically buff stain on, they have the mindset that they're trying to buff stain into the wood, instead of, with ours, the process should be, I'm taking the excess stain off the floor with the buffer. They're trying to buff it in. You do not want to use a carpet when you're applying this with a buffer, because what happens is the carpet will start to heat up, and it will it burnishes it. So you'll get this like smeary look, and it's just not very good. So again, the guys just need to get their head around the idea of removing the excess stain off the wood. So
good point. And I mean, once you do it, you'll figure it out in the first 200 square feet or
absolutely
100 square feet. Well, awesome. Well, Tim, thanks for letting me pick your brain about it. I was excited to use it on a panel, and I was really happy with the results. So thanks for answering some of my questions after the fact and setting me up for success the next time I try it.
Sounds good. No problem. Thank you for having me, Daniel. This was fun. And yeah, I'm looking forward to, more guys and gals trying it out there in the field. So
great. So this has been part of our larger series on alternative stains. If you have questions, please comment below, and like, subscribe, and like I said, comment. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.